How this massive ship reached this vast desert is still hard to explain, but when the Air Force saw it on their spy plane's monitor, they had no choice but to examine it. It was breathtaking up close, but when they looked inside, things turned out far stranger than they expected. Before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The sun hung low over the desert base, where Sergeant Colin and his military peers resided. They were staring at the monitors in front of them, which were directly connected to the camera of highly sophisticated spy plane. Colin was the one operating this special plane, and he did so for a very unusual mission. Normally, the spy plane stayed on the ground inside their base, but lately several strange events caused this to change. Colin and his crew had been investigating strange reports from local towns. A high spike of nighttime break-ins and unexplained flashing lights in the sky during the darkest hours after dusk had sparked interest of the military, so Colin and his team were ordered to investigate these strange occurrences. Colin had been remote, piloting the aircraft for over 3 hours and only spotted mile after mile of empty desert wasteland. Colin leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms. "Nothing but sand and more sand," he muttered. Mark, sitting beside him, sighed in agreement. So, with the confirmation of his colleague, Colin decided to call it a day. "We'll call it in for refueling," Colin said, his fingers hovering over the controls. The team was ready to call it for today. "A fresh search tomorrow might yield better results," one said. Colin nodded and was just about to issue the plane's return when something caught his eye on the screen. "What is that?" he whispered, leaning forward. The rest of the team snapped to attention, eyes locking onto the grainy footage. A dark shape, partially buried in the sand, stood out against the endless dunes. Colin zoomed in the camera to the max of its capability, and that's when he saw what it was. "That's a ship," he said in disbelief. Mark squinted at the screen, frowning. "A ship? Out here? That makes no sense." Mark called in the rest of the crew, who walked in frustrated. "Dude, I heard that pot roast is on the menu, and I'm hungry." These words of frustration were spoken in ignorance, though, because when the other crewmates saw what Colin and Mark projected on the monitor before them, they were also instantly stunned. "That's a damn ship! What the hell?" Mark tapped a few keys, zooming in further. "That's not just any ship," one of the fellow soldiers pointed out. "It's an aircraft carrier." The room fell silent. An aircraft carrier stranded in the middle of the desert? That was impossible. They would have known about it if it belonged to them. Colin's mind raced through the possibilities. Could it be an abandoned military project? A decommissioned vessel somehow transported here? But by whom? And more importantly, why? The desert was no place for a ship, let alone a carrier. "Is it one of ours?" Mark asked. But nobody had an answer. The drone hovered over the vessel, its camera capturing every strange detail. Rust covered large portions of the hull, and parts of the deck appeared caved in, as if it had been sitting there for years, but there were no tracks, no signs of how it got there. It was as if it had simply materialized from nowhere. "The spy plane can't land there," one of the teammates pointed out. "The sand's too loose, and winds at that level could knock it over." Mark nodded grimly. They wouldn't get any real answers unless they went there themselves. Colin didn't hesitate. "We have to get out there," he said, standing up. They were trained for the unexpected, and this certainly qualified. One by one, they moved toward their lockers, preparing their gear for whatever they might find. Mark slung his rifle over his shoulder while Colin double-checked the GPS coordinates. "This makes no sense," Mark muttered under his breath, and he wasn't the only one thinking that. Even the most rational minds in the room couldn't explain how a massive warship ended up buried in the desert sands. One of the fellow soldiers adjusted his tactical vest. "What's the plan once we get there?" Colin exhaled sharply. "First, we confirm what we're dealing with. Second, we check for any signs of recent activity. Because if this ship had anything to do with the recent disturbances, they needed to act on it." The base's transport hangar hummed with activity as the team loaded up their vehicle. A modified all-terrain transport was their best option to traverse the shifting sands. The sun would go down in less than an hour, meaning they had limited daylight left. If they moved quickly, they could reach the ship before nightfall. Mark climbed into the vehicle first, gripping the wheel. "Let's make this fast," he said, revving the engine. Colin and the rest of the team secured their gear, ensuring they had everything they needed. With a final check, Colin nodded. "All right, we move out now." The transport rumbled to life, dust swirling in the hot desert air. Whatever was waiting for them out there, they were about to find out. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, the sun casting an orange glow across the dunes. Colin guided Mark with the GPS as the vehicle rocked over the uneven sand. Then, in the distance, a massive shadow rose on the horizon. As they drew closer, the true scale of the vessel came into view, an enormous, rusted aircraft carrier, half buried in sand, towering over the desert like a forgotten giant. The team circled the ship, its immense frame stretching far into the distance. There were no footprints, no signs of life, just silence. It rose at least 60 feet into the air, the only visible way inside. The rusted bars looked fragile, but still intact. Colin stopped the vehicle. "This is our way in," he said. The men exchanged uneasy looks, checking their gear one last time. "Get ready for anything," Colin warned. Colin climbed steadily, the desert wind moaning around him. They had no idea what they were walking into. Reaching the top, Colin pulled himself onto the deck and helped Mark up. One by one, the rest followed, their boots clanging against the rusted surface. The flight deck stretched out before them, vast and empty, except for a few tied-down crates. Inside the cracked wood, Colin found old food rations, expired over 25 years ago, proof that the ship had been abandoned for decades. But Colin sensed something more. The sun dipped below the horizon, shadows crawling across the rusted metal. Mark scanned the area, his voice low. "It's even worse up here." Their footsteps echoed softly as they moved forward. The desert was silent now, but this silence felt different, too deep, too hollow. Ahead, about 50 feet away, a gaping hole yawned in the ship's hull. "That's our way in," Colin said, motioning for his team. The opening looked like a collapsed section leading into pitch blackness. They approached cautiously, the beam of their flashlights trembling against the rusted walls. Then, out of nowhere, a sound ripped through the air, a deep, guttural noise echoing from inside the darkness. Colin steadied his breath, forcing his legs to move. "We keep moving," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the dark opening ahead. Turning back wasn't an option. Hesitantly, the team advanced, each step echoing in the still air. The jagged opening loomed before them, its rusted edges flaking with decay. They had come too far to turn back. One by one, they entered, their movements careful and deliberate. Colin lifted his flashlight, cutting through the darkness. They moved slowly, scanning every corner. Pipes dangled from the ceiling, beams sagged overhead, and thin streams of sand spilled from cracks above. "If it's lasted this long, it'll hold," Colin said, steady but uneasy. The air thickened as they pushed deeper, the walls closing around them. It came from somewhere deep within. The men froze, eyes darting through the dark. The sound reverberated against the steel walls, then faded. "That was closer," Mark whispered. No one replied. They pressed on, nerves stretched thin. A sudden metallic clang shattered the silence, echoing like a warning. Colin clenched his rifle. "Stay sharp," he ordered quietly. Then Mark froze. "I saw something," he whispered. Colin turned sharply. "Where?" "Down there," Mark said, pointing toward the corridor's end. Something crossed. His voice trembled. Figures lunged from the darkness, striking with inhuman speed. A heavy blow crashed against Colin's head. Pain burst through him, the world tilting sideways as everything dissolved into black. When Colin awoke, his skull throbbed. His limbs were stiff, bound tightly. Colin clenched his fists, the ropes cutting into his skin. "Someone has to be here," he said firmly. The team shouted for answers, but only silence answered. They struggled against their restraints, realizing whoever tied them knew exactly what they were doing. Then, movement in the shadows. A woman stepped into the light, older, calm, commanding. "My name is Amina," she said, her voice cold but steady. "Amina, who?" Mark asked. "That's all you need to know," she replied. "I don't trust you yet." When Colin demanded to know why they were there, she turned to the darkness. Several men appeared, rough, not military. "Untie their legs," she ordered. "Keep their hands bound." Forced to stand, the soldiers followed her through a dim corridor. Rust coated the metal walls, and each step echoed through the hollow passage. Colin's mind raced. Who was she? What was this place? The hallway opened into a wide chamber filled with monitors, wires, and weary people in ragged clothes. Colin studied the monitors. They showed nearby villages, abandoned, lifeless, overrun by sand. "What happened to these places?" he asked. Amina said nothing. Amina stepped closer, her expression unreadable but heavy with emotion. "I risk everything by telling you this," she said quietly, "but something must change." Her eyes locked on Colin. "And my intuition says I can trust you. Don't disappoint me," she began to speak. "We are on the edge of the Sahara, where tribes once lived peacefully. But 30 years ago, conflict began. The government called for help and your people answered." Colin frowned. "Then who caused this?" Amina's gaze sharpened. "You did." The reports that lured you here, they were fake. We sent them. We needed to bring you in." She gestured around. "This ship isn't just our base, it's the reason this land is dying." She explained that decades ago, this was a shallow sea. The aircraft carrier had been sent here loaded with soldiers, but when attacked by local tribes, it broke down and became stranded. Over time, the water vanished, leaving the ship buried in sand. Oil and fuel leaked into the soil, poisoning everything around it. Crops died, families fled. "You came to help," Amina said bitterly, "but you destroyed instead." Colin's chest tightened. He had always believed their mission brought peace, not ruin. "That can't be true," he whispered. Amina pointed toward the people behind her faces hollow with grief. "Look around you. Do they look like liars?" Realization hit him. These weren't enemies, they were survivors. "You brought us here to see the truth," Colin said. Amina nodded. "We needed someone to listen." "Then tell me what you want." "Help us rebuild," she pleaded, "or leave and never come back." Her voice trembled with both anger and hope. Colin met her eyes. "I can't change the past, but I'll fix what I can. I'll take you to my base." Mark hesitated. "If Command doesn't like this, we're done." Colin shook his head. "After what we've seen, we can't walk away." Amina nodded. "Then we move now." Her people murmured in fear, but she silenced them. "If we don't act, nothing will change." They drove back to base in tense silence. When they arrived, Colin demanded to see the general. Inside, Amina placed a small drive on his desk. "Your men did this," she said. The general frowned, but when the footage played, his face darkened. "We thought we were helping," he muttered. "We didn't see the cost." "You do now," Amina replied. Within weeks, troops and civilians worked side by side to restore the villages. The old carrier was dismantled piece by piece, the poisoned ground cleansed. As the sun rose over renewed soil, Amina stood beside Colin, watching families return. "It's finally home again," she whispered.